Ahimarie, kia koutou katoa. My name is Jamie Wasilchenko. I work as the Taoka Online Project Officer at Otago Museum in Dunedin, and we're going to be talking about that project. And I'll just introduce, this is the project coordinator, Fiona Glasgow, and she's going to give you an introduction.
Right. So the Otago Museum has one of the largest Kai Tahu collections in the world, with over 66,000 registered objects and 670 bulk lots of archaeological material. This is an incredibly significant collection that represents hundreds of years of culture specific to Otago. From fish hooks to mere pounamu and everything in between, all of these objects have a story. And it was a great honor for Jamie and myself to work with these objects and stories and preserve them for the future. You can see the photo on the slide, which is of a couple of cases from the Otago Museum taken from the 1960s or so, we think. And you can see even 60 years ago, the Otago Museum had an incredible amount of Taoka, but we don't display objects like this anymore. So while a handful of these objects are still on display, most of them aren't. And so I think one of the beauties of this digitization project has been the opportunity to make all of these and more accessible again. So in this presentation, we're going to talk about the goals of the project, the day-to-day operations, things we did wrong and things we did right. We want to be really honest about the challenges we faced, but also celebrate our accomplishments. And just as an aside, we use the Te Reo dialect commonly used in Otago and Southland, so we say Kai Tahu rather than Nai Tahu and Taoka rather than Taonga. Right, so what is the Taoka Online Project? In 2016, the Otago Museum was granted money from the Lottery Environment and Heritage Committee to fund a 3-year digitization project. The project proposal outlined 4 main goals. 1, to digitize at least 20,000 objects, focusing on our Kai Tahu material, but also including special objects from other iwi that represented, superb examples of technique and culture. And the Taoka that's in our Tangata Whenua Gallery and our Southern Land, Southern People galleries. Once digitized, the second goal is to create a new collections online portal for these digitized objects, thereby increasing access. The third goal is that each object digitized has a condition report done with conservation treatment or repacking done as needed. And lastly, outreach, to actually go out to the community and help people care for or digitize their own Taoka collections. And Jamie's going to talk about the day-to-day operations for this.
All right, so a bit more about how we met those objectives. So the 2 of us worked as full-time project staff. In addition, the project proposal appointed 6 museum staff to dedicate a certain number of hours per work week on the project. So that included 1 conservator, our curator Maori, our collections manager and assistant collections manager of humanities, our developer of systems and interactive media, as well as our director of collections, research, and education. So we also had many volunteers, which I'll talk about in just a minute. But first, I'm going to walk you through sort of a day in the life of a Taoka to be digitized. So step 1 was inventory. A big challenge of this project was that many of the Taoka had never been inventoried. So if you can kind of picture shelves of boxes like these, and some things are sort of organized by object type and by location where they came from, but finding a specific Taoka wasn't so easy. So our first step was to confirm the locations of everything and input that into Vernon, which is our collections management system. And along the way, some things were also repacked. So you can see some patu being cavity packed into foam. Also loose organic items put into baggies, put into nice new boxes. And then secondly, our conservator came through and did a full condition report on everything. So noting any repairs that she had to make, whether things were stable enough to go on display, and so on. So next, each Taoka received a physical description. In the top right, you can see a screenshot of Vernon, where we added information to the record, such as material, color, measurements. We could also add flags if something was glam, that is if it was aesthetically pleasing or a particularly great example. And we also noted any cultural restrictions. We worked sometimes with things that were made out of human bone or that were associated with burials, so we noted that. We were also able to add to the object type. We have a Taoka Maori thesaurus with Vernon, so we were able to add the object type in English as well as in Te Reo. And then in the bottom right, you can see an example of one of our description guides. So we had these so that our descriptions could be standardized across collections. We would especially note things that might be of use to archaeologists. If some of the wooden Taoka, we could note carving styles and things like that. And then on the left side, you can see how Vernon is integrated with our online collections. So the same fields that are in Vernon show up online. And this is just an example of what we aim for. So next in the assembly line, each Taoka was photographed. So you can see here that our large, medium, and small setups. We used white paper or black velvet backdrops, depending on the color of the object. And a little bit about our technical equipment. So we shot using Nikon digital SLR cameras. We shot in RAW, and then we did edit them in Adobe Lightroom, just slight edits like adjusting white balance, removing dust, cropping, etc. And then we export to JPEG or TIFF files, which are just more practical and accessible for all museum staff to use. So here are examples of audit shots that we took, which include the object's accession number, the color chart, and a scale. Depending on how dimensional an object was, we would usually take between 2 to 8 audit shots. So the simplest, flattest 2D objects, we might take just front and back. Something more like this gouge, we would take enough to get all of the different angles of the bevel on the working edge. And something quite large, we might also take, for example, photos looking down each end, or however many different photos we need to cover all the angles. So many Taoka also had pub, or publishable shots taken, also known as Glam Shots. And these are photos that have nothing else except the Taoka in them. So they're useful for highlighting the aesthetics of the Taoka. They could be used for marketing. And they're kind of fun because you get to zoom in, get some up-close detail of notable features, and kind of play with composition, things like that. So that was the process that we followed, and now just a few different aspects of the project. So the first is volunteers. We had about 26 volunteers working over the course of the project, and we really can't stress enough how important they were to the success of it. Most were archaeology students, and they usually came in and worked about a 3-hour shift per week. They did things like entering descriptions into Excel spreadsheets, taking audit shots, and some even worked with our conservation team doing condition reports. And it was great for them to be able to handle Taoka that they normally just read about in class, but they also brought a lot of enthusiasm to the project, and it was quite helpful for Fiona and for myself to dilute some of that mundane, repetitive work that a digitization project always involves. And another component of the project proposal, if you remember Fiona mentioning, was outreach. So we met with 3 local runaka around Otago in order to gauge what needs they might have in terms of their own collections, either privately held with runaka members or at the marae. So these photos are from a Caring for Your Taoka workshop that we did out at Otago Marae, which is near Dunedin. and it actually has its own small museum on site at the marae. Our head conservator discussed preservation techniques and storage options. We created custom boxes for archival material, and it was really great for Runaka members to receive advice customized to their own Taoka that has been passed down to them over the years. And Fiona's just going to talk a bit about the online aspect of the project.
Right. Get caught up in my notes. So from the beginning, it was really important to us that the Taoka digitized as part of this project really stand out from our current collections online. So with this in mind, an entirely new collections online portal is being developed for this project. Being designed in-house means that we have greater control over the look and feel of the site. And you can see there a poster from our award-winning exhibition Hakui, the Women of Kai Tahu, which we're using as a sort of inspiration for the website. Because our design team has already done a lot of research into Kai Tahu art influences, it just makes sense to start there. Also, our new 150th logo, which you can see features prominently on these slides, will also feature on the website because it references that chevron pattern that's very common throughout Kai Tahu art as well. We have plans to implement a map function, ideally. Because place is so important in Te Ao Māori, we think this could be a really important way of helping people connect to their Taoka. We also want the site to be as bilingual as possible. Like Jamie mentioned, we were entering into Vernon the Te Reo and the English words so that when people search, they can use whichever language they prefer. And also we hope that will extend to, like headers and stuff like that on the website. And so the funding for the project also covered the implementation of a digital asset management system. The museum chose Piction because it integrates well with Vernon. And so our current collections online information currently comes from Vernon, but once Piction is implemented, the information for the new portal will come from Piction. And so Jamie and I haven't had much to do with this directly. This was implemented by other members of staff, but we'll try to answer your questions as best we can if you have any about that or point you in the right direction. And so we're not drastically changing the data fields that show on our current collections online, but we will have a sort of traffic light system so that nothing that's culturally sensitive will end up online, and we'll have all the proper permissions in place. And in that regard, we're very lucky to have our Māori Advisory Committee that helps us at the museum to make decisions based around, issues like this. And then disappointingly, but perhaps typically, it's not quite ready yet. We don't have anything to show you guys today, but it will be finished soon, so watch this space. So challenges and considerations. And I think this is really good to talk about because no doubt digitization is amazing and incredible and important. It's also quite hard. They're very repetitive. 5,000 fish hooks, 5,000 toki, 8,000 silkreat blades. By the time you've seen all of these, you'll be ready to tear your hair out. So you have to be patient. The day-to-day of a digitization project is relatively thankless. All of your hard work kind of culminates at the very end when it goes live. And, that's at the end of your contract or in some cases after you've left the job. So you can't get kind of caught up in the little stuff. You have to stay focused on the big picture, which is easier said than done. You also have to be a Jill of all trades. Within the space of a week, Jamie and I could be learning the difference between silkreat, porcelainite, and chalcedony, mastering professional camera equipment, sorting out numbering issues that have been ignored for decades, or inventorying boxes with 150 plus items in them. This probably sounds like a lot of museum work, but we had that impending time pressure that everything had to be done. So numbering issues were a huge challenge for us, and they caused delays throughout the project. I would say you can't start preparing for a digitization project too early. Get in, sort out what you want done, and you'll save a lot of time for your digitizers. Things that might be more specific to our project than to others, but with staff shifting. The original project coordinator moved up into the museum into another role, and then there was a slight delay hiring Jamie, which left just me on the project for a couple of months. Volunteers, though great, like Jamie said, also take lots of time to train and to answer their questions and to fix their mistakes. So most of them are great and don't need any help at all to get in and do what they need to do, but some will require supervision. Public involvement, this is something we should have done more of at the beginning, because as we've already heard several times today, you can't just put things online and expect people to use them. You have to go out to the community, find out what they want the site to be, find out how they would use it. And because we didn't do very much of that at the beginning, we need to do that now. Because if people don't use the site, then why'd we do it? Outreach. Although we had some successful programs, I think we could have had more. Early meetings with Runaka made really good connections and ideas, but they just never went anywhere. I don't necessarily see this as anyone's fault. Runaka and other community groups are often volunteer-run or have very small staff, and they're just very busy with their day-to-day. So it was a service we were prepared to offer, but at the end of the day, it wasn't about us, and we didn't want to push our priorities onto the Runaka groups. Yeah, and just 3D imagery was something that had a very steep learning curve that I never got around to learning how to do. But we will have some 360 spin interactives that are quite fun to play with. And so finally, and this is perhaps more of a consideration than a challenge, but is tikanga. Especially for two people not born and raised in New Zealand, we made the extra effort to learn as much as we could about tikanga, especially in a museum setting. And we were very lucky to have a patient curator Maori who was happy to answer our questions, and we had a lot. And so it's easy to do the little things, so not sitting on tables, not stepping over objects, not bringing food or drink into the workspace, which that last one we did 99% of the times, 99% of the time, but there was the time a coworker brought in a piece of accessioned cheese to photograph for another project. And it wasn't until after they had left that we realized that was, of course, still food. And so we just had to shift our way of thinking to make sure that we're not just doing the easy things. So we had to fix that. Taoka that represent tupuna could also be logistically challenging to photograph because they can't be placed face down. So Jamie and I had some creative setups to get all sides of these objects sometimes. And just anecdotally, this is probably one of my favorite photos that I took while working at the Otago Museum. It's one of, I believe, only 3 substantially whole moa eggshells in the world. And although you can see it's broken, we do have the other piece of it in our collection. It was incredibly nerve-wracking to photograph it. We had to make a special mount and just treat it with incredible amounts of care. But this was a good challenge, not a bad challenge. And then finally, Jamie's going to wrap up with some results and looking forward to the future.
All right, and now the positive, what we did accomplish. First of all, just a few weeks ago, we actually hit our main goal of 20,000 plus Taoka digitized. So these records now have high-resolution photos, more standardized and concise physical descriptions, and it's really become a rich database for archaeologists in particular. Researchers in South Island archaeology will be able to view certain entire digitized collections of stone tools like silkrete blades and slate knives, which are unique to the South Island. Number 3, museum staff and our Maori Advisory Committee will be able to process access requests more efficiently. There's also been a dramatic change in consolidating and repacking, which opened up whole shelves of storage, which is always at a premium in museums. Updated inventories, sorting out numbering issues will have a huge institutional benefit. And condition reports will also be enormously helpful for staff as we are poised to redevelop our Tāngata Whenua Gallery, which you see here. So this has not been redone since 1990. It was cutting edge then, but not so much now. But we hope to be able to incorporate touch screens within the gallery space so that visitors can still interact with digitized Taoka that we've done that might not be on display. So finally, looking forward, there are a few unknowns. What will the response be from the general public and from researchers? Who will manage and answer all the feedback that we anticipate receiving? How will the content and data be used? The full potential of the project may be yet to be seen. So do we have any questions?
Just go for it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just heard you talk about access and streamlining the ability to access these images.
Mm-hmm.
So am I right to, I'm making the assumption that means that the images are going to be on your new portal
Mm-hmm.
and that they're copyrighted and that as a result people are going to have to apply for access for reuse. Is that correct?
That is correct as much as, yep.
And, okay. Was the cultural perspective taken about actually putting the images online before it
Yep.
was?
So as I mentioned, we flag things that have perhaps cultural restrictions.
Yeah.
So those things are filtered out through Piction.
Mm-hmm.
In addition, everything that is going up online is going through our Maori Advisory Committee. So that they take into consideration the advice of our curator Maori.
So what's the purpose then of having the images restricted for reuse?
Not all of them. Well, copyrighted, but
I'm trying to tease out why it wasn't open by default if you've already gone and gotten appropriate cultural engagement on this already.
It's more that we have permission to put them online to be used in certain ways, but we
Right.
don't have permission to just put them out there for people to use however they want to.
Okay.
So there is that level of restriction between how we can put them online, but not how people can use them.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. Yeah, sorry.
That's exactly what I wanted. Thank you.
Yeah.
As with a lot of New Zealand Lotteries funded digitisation projects, I'm assuming you had a sort of storage and digital preservation challenge at the end of it with all of the data that you collected. I was just wondering how you dealt with that, and given the cultural considerations, whether there were issues with storing on the cloud, perhaps.
That is interesting and not actually something that I know much about. I know data sovereignty is something that's becoming a bigger topic these days. I don't think our information is stored on the cloud. I think it's backed up locally at the museum and by our IT staff. But yeah, I'm not sure exactly who planned that out. But that'd be really interesting to find out.
I understand you have your Māori Advisory Board and you had done some outreach, but I'm wondering how much engagement and collaboration with different iwi and indeed hapu coming into the museum and working with you during this project.
Yeah, and so like I said in our challenges, I think that's something that we should have had more of. We were very lucky to have our curator Māori, who is from Otago, to give us advice, and we were mostly working with the Kai Tahu collection, and we have the Māori Advisory Committee as well, but yes, we haven't had quite as much public input on that as we could.
So just kind of going on from that, the outreach as well, it was something that we offered. So different Runaka members could come in for tours, or we tried to work with them maybe to digitize or care for their own collections. Unfortunately, we didn't receive as much response to those offers of services as we hoped for, but with the redevelopment of Tāngata Whenua, hopefully that will just increase and we'll get a bit more feedback on that.
Sorry, the director, Robert Morris, is sitting in the crowd there, and he says he can answer the question about the data sovereignty if the mic could be passed to Robert.
All of our data is stored internally on various drives, and that way we can ensure appropriate backups, etc., etc. We have no policy around cloud storage at this stage, nor are we likely to in the short term. In answer to the access issues around that, providing the images to third parties is an issue that our Maori Advisory Committee was quite concerned with. Hence, they're allowing it to be posted online, but any subsequent use needs to go through them for permission.
Sorry, just going back to the outreach portion, and you were talking about even though you didn't have much uptake with working with other community members and how to digitize their own Taoka. I was wondering if this bespoke system or platform that you'll be developing, would you have an opportunity to expand that opportunity for digitizing and storage of community members' collections on that platform as well, or a space for access for their collections too?
Yeah, I mean, that's a lovely idea and something that I think should definitely be explored. We are also creating some resources for community members to use to care for and digitize their own Taoka from like a Kai Tahu perspective. So those kinds of resources will be online. Yeah, that's a really nice idea. It'd be really interesting. Got anything to add to that one?